We will now move into oral communications. This is the opportunity to address the council on any matter of interest, whether on the agenda or not, unless additional time is authorized by the council. All commentary shall be limited to 3 minutes. Is there anyone that would like to come forward under oral communications? Do we have anyone on virtually?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. None in council chambers and none virtually. We will move on to the study session.
Thank you, Your Honor, and appreciate the council's time this evening and the scheduling of your study session to consider the establishment of recycled water rates, sewer, and solid waste rates. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Lawless, Mayor, and members of council. The title, I apologize, does not necessarily roll off the tongue, but the efforts of tonight's meeting is to review and discuss the presentation and items from a number of consultants for both sewer and the solid waste. The effort of this process was to put together a unified approach on a holistic evaluation of overall utility cost across the city and implementing the changes as necessary to move forward and to continue the level of service. And so for the first topic tonight, as we look into the establishment of recycled water rates, this water rates as a whole will end up coming back to council. We're in the process of a number of implementations. Those are legislative actions, so AB 606 and 1668, as I've spoken to council previously about water conservation as a way of life and the mandatory reporting and conservation efforts that will become an implemented regulation within the city. So as we go into 2024, at the end of 2023, we'll start the reporting period. That process began back in 2018 and ultimately getting us to the point of data collection and preparing reports to DWR, state water boards, and other regulatory agencies as it relates to water consumption and production within the city. So because of the timing not aligning with these evaluations, ultimately at this point in time, the recycled water rate needs to be established because of the activities and projects that are moving forward within the city. And what is presented to you is a draft copy of a public notification for 218 process that would be distributed to the community of ratepayers within the community to identify that the city intends on providing a meter rate for potable water. Currently, we had a project that went in and installed a meter larger than previously identified within the system for operation. So a 10-inch meter rate was not established, resulting in the need to establish a rate, and that's part of the 218 process. And currently, through the casino project and the recycled water project, the ability to serve recycled water to the casino relocation facility and the sports complex. And to do that, currently we are subsidizing the operation at the casino relocation until the tertiary plant is online, which is intended to be online before the end of the year. We are preparing to start commissioning the plant. We've been running tests, leak tests on the tank, pressure tests on the vertical turbine pumps, and running the membrane filter for samples. That commissioning process is intended to take about 90 days, hoping that that is not the case, but the other item in that is out of our control is the permitting process through Department of Drinking Water, Recycle Division, and then finishing up that process with their review and comments and integrating any comments or changes that they would request of the city. Also would require the city to amend the WDRs through the Regional Water Quality Control Board, so our discharge permit from the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So this all coincides with the implementation of this notification that would go out to the customers identifying a new rate structure for a 10-inch meter for potable service and implementing the recycled water rate associated with the consumption and the meters and backflow prevention devices, all that would be implemented with recycled water. With this process, we'll continue to provide review and the changes that would come to the city with the 606 and 1668 items. I would fully intend to have additional review and coming back to council for any recommendations later in 2024. But for tonight's item, it's just consideration for moving forward on the establishment of rates and infrastructure as presented in this staff report. Important to note to council that the anticipated revenue has been calculated for the service. Currently, with the number of customers, it's the city and the casino. Anticipated to generate about $262,644 based on the production of the plant, without taking any factors into subsidized water for demand, just strictly based off the production of the recycled water plant. Unfortunately, I don't have any other option for consideration. It's basically the implementation of the rates as presented, and happy to answer any questions for council as relates to this topic at this time.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for the information that we've been provided, and I want to say what a thorough study report. I mean, there was so much information that I'm glad we're having the discussion here this evening. With that being said, I'm going to ask council members, and I'll begin with Councilmember Beltran. Is there anything you'd like to comment or ask questions?
Yeah, I'll try and limit it because I had a lot. So, as I was reading through the report and looking at the adjustments for the different various customer classes, I was curious why Porta Vista, their rates won't be increased. I saw in 2028 that would be adjusted.
Councilmember, may I interrupt?
Sure.
So I have three topics tonight. So one is the recycled water rate. The next would be the sewer rate, and then the following would be the refuse rate. So rather than bleeding all the spill into one, I was going to break it up just for the opportunity. So essentially with this, basically would like to get council consensus if there's any objection or recommendations based on the rates for recycled water sales or service.
Yeah, no problem. I got you now. Initially looking at the rates, I'm trying to think of my notes here. That was a $262,000 for the plant that's coming to come online, correct? That was going to be the projected revenue?
That's the projected revenue, correct?
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, this will be part of the budget discussion because in large part, that's going to be parks paying for recycled water to the water fund. So it's a general fund. So right now there's in large part, what we're saying is that probably $200,000+ is going to come from the general fund paying for water, recycled water at the sports complex, paying the water fund for the water that it's receiving.
Yes, 'cause-
And whatever the proportional share is between it's 2/3, 1/3 essentially.
correct, yeah.
Was there also the plan to also get that water pumped out to other areas other than the airport? Was that going to also be maybe connected to part of that side of the community, on the west side of the community?
So currently, we're only permitted to apply at the sports complex and the casino.
Okay.
That's where the permit has been applied and the use of discharge will be identified. Now, we have a recycled water feasibility study. We'll be coming back to council with the master plan consideration. We're in the process of environmental for the conversion of our wastewater plant to full tertiary discharge. That's also probably some of the discussion that will be had in the sewer rate discussion. But as these rates apply and then the need for these rates, currently exist as it's related to the service of the sports complex and the casino.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was curious on that future revenue, if we anticipated that going up, but since it's only for those specific areas, then that's kind of what's locked into. Okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Meister.
So the treated water at the tribe will be paying for that treated water at the casino?
Essentially, as a customer of the city of Porterville, correct?
Gotcha. What does it cost to treat the water per 100 cubic feet?
So we've not started the plant yet. So we have some tentative evaluations in the budget. We factored in, there's consumables of about $42,000 a year just in chemical for treatment. And it's all projections and estimates at this time. So essentially, getting this started will kick off that evaluation and give us a better understanding of what that looks like. Projected costs across the development of the wastewater plant is also still evaluated and projections only. I don't have a good number for you on what that would be per 100 cubic feet. At this time, with the limited number of customers, we're essentially just capturing back that cost of distribution.
Gotcha. So when we try to expand this will come back to the council for more direction?
Well, as projects develop that provide additional capacity, definitely.
Okay.
And even then, if I may, it's still probably going to be a limited customer base, at least with the first. My anticipation will be just the city and probably school districts as the initial kind of low-hanging fruit is to try to connect the larger landscape areas along the major trunk line around Morton. Is that a?
Yeah, I would agree. So in the recycled water feasibility study, it identified green spaces that would be a primary candidate for use of recycled water. Much of those details is based on the fact that the area has to be controlled. So there has to be like a site supervisor. There has to be somebody that monitors the use of that water. The city is responsible for overseeing the implementation of those securities. There is cross-connection control surveys. So there's additional labor to the Water Utility Division to perform cross-connection control surveys, backflow testing annually. So there's some work that goes into that, which identifies the use on the specific green spaces that would be primary candidates for that.
So I don't know if my questioning is going to blend into the future topics, but just thinking out loud and talking about the cost of treating the water to selling the water, because then we'd be selling to PUSD, it sounds like, and ourselves here in the future. And the reason why we can't go residential with it is because the fear of, a child drinking from the hose or something, right? And drinking that treated water.
Correct.
Okay. All right, interesting. So that's where, back to my question with the cost to treat it to what we're selling it for. And then, because the constituents are who ends up paying for this to go forward, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so it's just a thought of mine. That's all for now, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wyrock. Any comment? Any questions?
Thank you. And a great report, Director. I'm looking at the meter base. Thank you for that information on the different diameters. That's just a one-time fee, or is that per 100 cubic feet? It looks like it's per 100 cubic feet, correct?
So in the rate structure, the meter is a monthly service charge for the meter to exist at the property. And then addition to the meter cost per month is the consumption cost per 100 cubic feet of $1.91.
Okay. And so currently, for when it goes online, it'll be able to produce, what is it, 308,000 gallons a day? Is that right?
Yes.
And so of that amount, how much will be consumed from, in like within the first 30 days, will we be at 308,000 gallons consumed pretty much every single day per month through the year, or is it projections on how much water they're actually going to use that's produced?
So during the development of that project, it was evaluated the average consumption for the sports complex and an evaluation made for the irrigation demand at the casino project. And that was the number calculated for the construction of the plant. In addition to the capacity of the construction of the plant, that was also the reasoning behind a larger storage reservoir. So during the days of high demand, any unused production would be utilized the following day. So in operation, you'd have flexibility in that operation and reduce, hopefully, during the times of high demand, having additional supply to handle that increased capacity, and also not force our hand in relieving that available supply that's been treated to the reclamation area. So that would be the alternative of unused supply would be distributed to the reclamation area and become return flows to our program out there. That is why the plant was not overbuilt at the time, because of the ongoing demand. We don't want to expend additional cost and labor to treat water that is not going to be consumed. So that was within the specification and design of the two projects.
Great. That leads to my final question on that, is that we can take the water that's treated, and if it's not used at the casino or by the city, we can put it out on reclamation area, and that won't violate any permit, correct?
That's correct.
And then this revenue that's generated for this will eventually just go to help replace damaged equipment, cover costs for it, and eventually, help us break even with the expenses we put into it and help us expand the tertiary programs to other areas of the city.
Yes, correct.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam Mayor, no other questions?
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor, any comment, any questions?
Yes, thank you we're breaking this up in 3 portions, right? For tonight's, is that how we're going to do it?
Yes, that's a lot
Okay.
of information.
So for tonight, or for starters, as we talk about the recycled water and the fee, just on process. So after we have our discussion tonight, kind of ask questions, get information, then we will hold a public hearing for comment on this.
Yes, so the intent of
rates.
tonight's study session is to get consensus from council. Besides the recycled water, we have basically one option for the recycled water, and it's to mirror our existing potable water rates. And the reason, let me explain the reason for that is because the operation right now is so small, and so the overhead is greater, and it is being managed between 2 departments. So between the wastewater division overseeing the physical operation of the plant, the distribution side and maintenance for anything outside of the fence, any repairs, any service lines that are being altered or rerouted comes from the distribution side out of the water department. So with the small service, other agencies would provide an incentive to use the recycled water. So once recycled water is greatly available, you would incentivize with a reduced cost to encourage people to use more recycled water. But right now, in the basis of our projects, the projects are designed and constructed to meet the minimum demand of the projects identified to use recycled water. So with the current rate structure, we would just be following in suit with the offsetting demand. So although we talk about buying recycled water, we are actually taking water and using it twice to its best and highest use. And you have the cost of the rate to subsidize the treatment process and maintenance of that utility.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any other questions right now. Mayor?
Okay, thank you.
If I can, just to contribute to the and this is really, I know we're caught in the moment, but think about this in a 10-year conversation, because that's really, here we have, coming online, and it's been a long time conversation to transition to begin to tertiary treatment recycled water. As long as I've been at the city, that's been an objective. But looking at 10 years from now, and you have Visalia as the case study on this. So Visalia treats all their wastewater to this level, and they entered into an exchange with Tulare Irrigation District, TID. And mentor of mine, Mike Olmos, who was the city manager there, said, don't fall for what the deal that Visalia did, which was, I think it was a 2-to-1 water exchange. So they traded their water to TID, because this can be used to grow consumptive crops. You can grow nuts. I don't know if there's any limitations on any consumable agriculture. I know, just generally speaking, water is water at this point from a growing standpoint, agricultural standpoint. And so given that they were an early adopter, they entered into a 2-to-1 swap, and we're kind of on the bad end of that deal. And so what I would anticipate 10 years from now, with full applications of Sigma and groundwater limitations that are very much ratcheting up right now, that this will be this is new water in the system. And when groundwater is limited and surface water is limited, this is 5,000 acre feet of water. What's the green space calculation, Mike? It's like 30% of our use?
Yeah, it's still small. It was early in adopting those evaluations. I want to say currently we've identified about 300 acre feet a year for green spaces. And part of that was probably primarily due to the infrastructure in getting those utilities to additional green spaces. But that number is going to grow.
Is that based on a 2-day watering week as well?
No, we actually, at that point, once water's available, we'll want it to be used as much as possible. So
300 acre feet.
yeah.
So for comparison, we treat 5,000 acre feet. So
A year.
A year. So there's a huge delta of magnitudes of water that will be available. And this is why you have irrigation districts that are forming without water, in the hopes of hopefully being someday to be able to access this water, because frankly, there isn't new water that becomes available.
And so the water is being used twice. I mean, although it is recycled water and used for irrigation, but when you realize currently potable water, drinking water, is being used for irrigation, it identifies a priority in where you apply that water. And so it will increase the city's potable supply by directly inserting recycled water. So although we pump 5,000 acre feet a year of effluent, it would make available potentially 4,000, I mean, it fluctuates depending on the time of year, but 4,000 to about 4.6 million gallons a day in water that could be reutilized within green spaces. So when we talk about that, our reclamation area, and forgive me, Robert, if I misquote the acreage, somewhere around 660 acres out there that we irrigate with effluent in some fashion, whether the acreage is fluctuated or not, but we irrigate that with effluent on fodder crops currently. So if you take that water and reapply it to green spaces, you have a direct supply for parks, you have a direct supply for schools, you have water available that is not restricted use because it's not potable water.
And not a conversation for tonight, but do not recommend that the city get in the farming business like Visalia did, which turned out not to be I think they got into the nuts business, and that ended up not being a good proposition for them.
We bought a lot of walnuts for a while. I'll just add that, so this is the starting point. We're starting with this. So once we have more information about the costs, we'll be able to finer,
Correct.
tune the actual cost of service. So I think really Public Works is looking at, like, we have to start somewhere. This is a logical, reasonable place to start. And then once we actually have more, we have records, when we start actually providing this service, having the production, seeing where it goes, seeing what the costs are, we'll be able to further refine what those costs are. I mean, it really is just a starting point at this point.
Correct. And under drought conditions, being able to irrigate every day is definitely an incentive for your green spaces in our parks.
I just want to make one comment because it doesn't haunt me, but it was a conversation about 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. But that was when they were beginning to form the Eastern Tule River Groundwater Sustainability Agency under SGMA. And that's a whole different world. That is a whole different world because they're having to deal with the surrounding areas and the water distribution to that. Now, bringing it back, that's just a comment. But bringing it back to where we are here, and then I'm going to go back to council members. I want to just say, once again, with the recycled, I understand it about the Marion, with the existing potable water rates, and do whatever we have to do to get through that, because that information is going to come back to us. But I have to tell you, when I was looking at the sewer rate study, I was amazed as to how many residential and commercial breakdowns were on here, and amazed as to how many and where and how come. That's a lot.
Yes.
That is a lot. That is a big number. And educate me as I'm looking at your report.
It's a good segue.
Well, educate me, please, because as I looked at the breakdown of the customer classes and the residential and the commercial, and recognize there's so many businesses and household, and anyway, I'm looking under the sewer rate
Yes.
study. Educate me on alternative 1 and alternative 3.
So before, could we transition to that? Is there any
Okay. any-
unanswered questions or anything
please,
like
let's
that
go back to
on
that one.
tertiary
Okay.
treatment?
I got questions on that too, Martha.
Okay,
And-
okay.
I love that you're segueing into that.
Okay.
Is this process here that we're talking about now with this rate schedule, does it have to go through the Prop 218 process?
So that's exactly it, and I apologize, Councilmember, when you mentioned that, I meant to provide that last bit. So with the consensus tonight, what it will do is provide staff direction. We can go back and finalize a single document. Of course, we have a single document for recycled water, but that's not the case with the two upcoming discussions. So we'll have a direction from council on a preferred direction, and then we will prepare a notice that looks much like the 218 on the recycled water, and it will break down all the costs. And we will come back to council for consideration to conduct a public hearing. So the staff report will come to council, ask to set a public hearing. Council agrees to set the public hearing, and then there's a notification process, 45-day notification process that we would go through, and then we would set the public hearing at the existing meeting to be conducted 45 days later, and that's when we would take additional comments and public input as well.
So yes, the answer.
Yeah,
It is
and
subject to 218.
I'm just a little confused, and you're going to straighten me up right now. So my understanding is this is because the only treatment plant is out at the tribe, right? Or the casino, I mean?
Yeah, it's on
this is
city
what it-
property that serves the casino and the sports complex, yes, that's correct.
Yes, so they're going to serve the sports complex. So, and we're going to get an evaluation on what the cost is, and we'll get real numbers from that. Okay, and then we'll revisit it in the future and get to make decisions from that point, once we get those numbers.
Yes.
Okay.
It's actually a good question. Would you do a new 218?
So what we are doing this time is even though the rate is the same as what the other rate, we are establishing a new rate. So establishment of rates requires a 218 process. From that point forward, after we've adopted this rate, once we start it'll take a year. I mean, we're going to need a year at least to really get numbers. So once you see what the costs are, it's our responsibility. The city has to reevaluate and make sure that we're not charging any more than the cost of providing the service. So if it ends up going down, it's actually not subject to a 218 hearing process to lower rates. However, it would still need to go to the city council to be considered and approved. If there are increases needed in any given particular rate from that point forward, we legally must go through the Prop 218 process, which also has like it's a protest proceeding, but it's a silence is a yes type of protest proceeding that's involved. So really, this, like we said, this is the starting point, which is why starting points require a Prop 218 process. And so we'll go through that. And I think it's interesting, but I believe that even though it's not by district, it's all ratepayers vote on new rates, even though right now we only have a couple customers, because we could theoretically have more, it applies to the entire city. The entire city is the protest, or the body that you do the protest proceeding with. For any utility, like water, sewer, solid waste rates, that's how it works.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Even though they're not necessarily, they don't have access to it yet. There hasn't been a provision for it. It's not like a district where you've got a district developed and you only charge those, or you only take it before them. Just like when we do commercial rates, we don't just notify all commercial, right? We always notify everybody, don't we?
Yes.
I
Now,
believe
do we
so.
send a letter to every purveyor, or is it something that just goes in the paper?
It's
and
noticed in the paper for this kind, oh, no, actually, I take it back. It goes in the water bill
It goes
for
in the
45 days.
Every customer will
Yeah.
get a notice?
Every customer
this
gets a
rate
notice of
increase.
this rate, of
Okay,
this new
fair
rate.
enough.
Yeah, and to your, because my speculation is this, what we're probably going to, let's say it's the $1.91 per unit. Mike, is it fair? It's an estimation. It's probably going to be more expensive if you, at the cost of, because it's a very energy intensive process with UV treatment. So it's an anticipation that it could be more, and that was the reason I was saying.
We really don't know. We don't know yet, right?
But if it
Yeah.
comes back and it says that the cost per unit is $2 instead of $1.91, that's a new 218 process. to
It would be a new
increase that.
218 process to have the ratepayers pay that, and then if we're in a situation where we're not charging enough, then that means general fund has to take care of it, because we can't have other ratepayers take care of a cost. Like, we have to make sure that we meet the proportionality requirements of Prop 218.
The general fund's already paying 2/3 of the cost.
I know, it has to pay more,
As the
right?
customer.
So, yeah.
I would say that probably the same, but a little slightly different. I fully anticipate it to be more expensive than what our potable supply price is now.
And you hit on a point that I was trying to make, and I'm not super articulate, but the cost is going on the constituents, but they're not getting to use the treated water. It's unless they're out at the sports complex, of course, I guess.
Well, here,
that
no
would-
one's seeing a change, so you don't have that happen here, but.
The city pays that water bill at
Well,
the sports
right.
complex. There is nobody that pays a water bill at the sports complex.
Yeah, well, that's the people, though, that's what I'm saying.
He's
That's
saying
it.
the general fund, because general fund is general tax money, it ends up being.
So I
know
just
what
want to
you're
provide
saying.
a slight correction to that. I don't anticipate the general fund to pay for the overage on the water bill itself. What's going to happen is, because this is water related, so you're generating an offset supply. So whether or not it's an
yeah.
additional cost to treat the water, we've set a base rate that is not more laborsome than the existing potable water rate. So that incentivizes it. I mean, if we go and charge $3 a unit to a customer, why would they take recycled water? So it's got to be equal to or incentivized to utilize. And right now, it's equal to, because that's the max we would set to be able to purchase that water and utilize it in an alternative to potable water. And as a result of that, you're going to have less restriction days for irrigation. And in addition to that, the plumbing code requires any additional source supply as recycled water. If you have a permitted recycled source supply and construct a dual plumb facility or have the ability to irrigate open green spaces, you are required to utilize that to do those activities.
So, my understanding of what you just said, the constituents of Porterville are going to pay to treat the water, maybe, let's say $3 a 100 cubic feet. and then we're going to sell it back to PUSD at $1.91 a 100 cubic feet. Is that what I'm getting? So my issue is that the people are paying for it, and if I'm not understanding you correctly, correct me, but,
Well-
Because I kind of have the same question.
yeah, if the people are paying for it, and then we're going to give the water at a cheaper rate, that's unfair to the people, isn't it?
Well, but the people aren't paying for it
How do you figure?
because there's only two customers, which the cost of the treatment is going to be passed along to the city and the tribe.
Okay, the people own the city. That we are the taxpayers, so that's the
Well, the
point
people,
of that.
well, so not that the private resident isn't paying it in their water, you're not paying your water bill towards it.
Your water bill doesn't go.
Your water bill will not go towards this.
But my sewage bill will.
No.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
No, okay, important point. Enterprise funds, general fund. General fund is tax dollars that come in, sales tax, property tax, utility users tax, transit occupancy tax, those sorts of things. Those are taxes that you come and you can use it. Right, typically, we pay for public safety with it. That's 75% of your general fund allocation is to public safety. The remaining 25% is administration, parks, community development, city attorney, that sort of thing. So enterprises, and that's where we're going to get into, is sewer. That is an enterprise. It is, those are fees, not taxes. Fees are collection for services rendered. Important distinction between what a fee is and what a tax is. Taxes don't have something that come as a correspondence. It's just, here it is, and then you spend it according to your priorities. A fee is for a service. It
So
can
will
only
I be
applied-
paying that fee on my sewage bill?
No.
No. You're going to just pay your normal rates. Your rates do not change under this scenario. It's only, we are setting new rates for those that are using the recycled water, and their use for recycled water fees are right now going to match up with the same, with our regular structure. And that's where we're starting with. Those recycled water rates might change once we look at real documentation on the cost of the service.
And this is your water rate, not your sewer rate.
Right, we're talking only water rates.
Mayor has a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've learned a lot in the last 5 minutes. Thank you, first of all, for all the information, and I did read through it. I know that it becomes more clear when we're here discussing and asking questions, even by all the council members. That always helps me. But, so for when, like I just learned, this is a new rate. This isn't addition to our current water rate. The other thing is
But it's not a
that-
new rate that everybody's paying. I think that's
Right.
what I want to make sure. It's a
Well,
new rate that applies to only those limited customers, which is really the city and the tribe, right?
So because we're looking at a schedule and it's going to go in everyone's bill, so we're thinking in that mode of, okay, we're getting, in a public hearing, we're getting ready to tell the public we're going to
Well,
put
and-
rates.
and to the council member's point, when we're able to, because there's $120 million in capital projects that need to happen to be able to treat 5 million gallons a day. We're talking about treating 300,000 gallons just to water the sports complex and the dual plumb part of the casino and its outdoor irrigation under purple. So that's it's a closed system, even though the rate applies to everybody. When we expand this to include the school districts, there'll have to be a new analysis done of what are going to be the operating costs, because they're going to go up substantially.
Which, by the way, expansion of the system would be covered by, like, that's separate from even service. So that's not even in this discussion. If we are looking at building more facilities to do more of this, that we have to actually get those amount, the expansion of service, the improvements costs have to come from those that are the new users that we need that for. So that's where, if we have development impact fees, or if we actually have what we did with the tribe, for instance, where we have an agreement as what the share of that is, what is their share going to be? Why do we need that facility? What's the proportion amount? How big are we going to build it? And how much of that is not yours because it doesn't have to do with your expansion? And that's a whole separate discussion, and there's a whole separate way of establishing what those rates are.
So
And that
continuing to
percentage.
roll out my thoughts here, because I'm trying to get a clear understanding. So then, those will be the two customers that we're looking at and we're discussing as of right now. In the future, as we continue to build and have, expanded the recycle water.
Or if there's additional capacity that we find available with the existing system, we could have more that are paying that new rate.
Okay, so then as we do that, will the rates be set at this point to continue throughout, or we would have to do
We would need to
analysis?
evaluate, because this
Okay.
is always a process where we need to look at it, because,
Okay.
and especially when we're dealing with something new like this, because normally we can anticipate the costs are always going to go up, but here it's hard to say, right? So we're going to have to look at it. We will need to look at it.
So I see where we're at right now. And then my only other question, Mr. Knight, is when you talked about incentivizing this recycled water, is this the point to ask, say, when we start having this available for residents and commercial, especially I'll use school districts as an example, would this be something in the city that they are required to do or be a part of? Or is this something, no? So, okay, even
No, but-
residents?
Well, as Mr. Knight said, so a lot of this is confined by permitting.
Okay.
As Mr. Knight said, so if you're going to receive this at your house, are you going to certify yourself to be able to make sure that it's handled in an effective means? So generally speaking, right now, under permitting, you find this in public spaces. Because for example, you'll see it on the highway. You'll frequently see recycled, reclaimed water, right? Because Caltrans is responsible. There's somebody that's responsible that knows, and there shouldn't be kids playing in that water in the median. And I don't mean to be snarky about it. I'm just saying it's in a controlled environment. Any more than you have kids in orchards that they're using it. And that's why Visalia did that with the irrigation districts, because it wasn't being used. It was being used for a specific purpose that those people are permitted in its use. So. But the school districts will want to do this because they're very unhappy only watering 2 days a week right now. And the ability to water 5 days a week is very much their interest. So what we have found is that money's not an issue because they're more than happy to pay the fines for watering on non-watering days. In fact, they build it in their budgets, they say. Both school districts. So neither of them are off the hook when it comes to watering on non-watering days and paying fines and not really feeling bad about that.
I appreciate you guys. I hope I'm not coming off as jabby here, but.
No, these are good questions.
Yeah, and talking about the schools and their watering, it would be nice to see them to be able to water because those are our public schools, correct? And something PUSD does that I'm not a fan of and Burton doesn't, but they leave the fields open at Burton and PUSD, they close the fields after school. And so if they're going to be using that water, I wonder if there's any kind of agreement we could have to open those doors, maybe just to later hours for people to use those fields. But that just thinking out loud for future.
Yeah, I think that will be an important conversation. That's been one of the city schools. In fact, they've even proposed, knowing they have some of the schools that are kind of off. I'll use, help me, north on middle school.
North Prospect?
Off, yeah.
Sequoia.
Sequoia, yeah. My oldest went there. At Sequoia, well, there would have to be a line brought down Morton all the way out there to be able to water that campus with recycled water. And that's currently not in our infrastructure plan today. But that is something the school, PUSD, has suggested, maybe a project that they focus on as part of their, in how they can partner in putting installation to be able to. My point is they want to receive the water. Because they want to have the ability to water as much as they wish, so to speak, without having to be conscientious. And I think there's another part of this. When you tell somebody when drinking water is in short commodity and we're putting it on park spaces, some people cringe because like, why are you doing that when people don't have drinking water? But that's the system we have. And this would be a migration to that. So. When you have a number of water systems that don't have, they're nitrated water, and yet we're putting our drinking water on parks, This is a matter of trying to provide that additional option.
Right.
And I think these are all great questions, and a lot of these questions will tailor into the thought process as we go through the other two reports. And the idea and implementation and utilizing recycled water is a multifaceted opportunity that's going to really benefit the city moving forward. And there's going to be a number of implementations and evaluations of how that is implemented. And so just back to the rate, it's a starting point. And as we continue to develop and evaluate, it's within the utility to maintain the rate structure and the operation. And it's basically going to be its own living operation, just to utilize recycled water.
Any more comments, any more questions on this one? On this one. I'm excited about going on to the next one. With regard to, okay, with the sewer rate. Now, as you guys were having this discussion, I went on to the.
I think, well, we don't need any official voting tonight,
No,
but
not
we just
tonight.
needed to hear comments. But is there any issue or concerns with what Public Works is proposing with regard to the
To the recycled water.
recycled water rate?
So what we would be doing is bringing an item to you on a consent calendar saying, we met on this date, there was a study session, here's what it's scheduled to 2/18 for November. We have to do a 45-day. So there's still another step in between.
quite a few,
Official
actually, yeah.
action, yeah, at a minimum, one more.
Is it pretty much like just to mirror what the existing?
Yes.
Just to mirror the existing
In
potable
this,
water?
as it relates to recycled water, it's basically
Into the
what's,
recycled water, that
As
was the
presented.
comment. Is there any other comment on that?
The next step will be an item just to authorize
council.
the setting of the public hearing and
Okay.
authorizing the notices to go out, basically, so that
Correct.
Mike can meet his deadline.
Councilmember Wyrock, are you okay with that?
I am, thank you.
Okay, didn't want to leave you out. All right.
I would check, Cody, are you online?
Yes, I am.
For the presentation tonight, we'll start off with Cody Berg with Carollo Engineers to provide a presentation to council. I do have that, and Cody, as you would like, please let me know when you would like to proceed slides.
Absolutely. Is it okay if I drive, Michael?
Sure.
Are you okay with that?
Need back out, yeah.
Great. I've got this pulled up in front of me here, so we should be good to go. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be in front of council today to present results of this important study that, gosh, Michael and Robert and I have taken on for quite some time now. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
We can hear you, but have you shared something already, or are you waiting to share?
I have not yet. So as I alluded to, this has been a work in progress for quite some time. I think we've come up with a good work product here, and we would love to get a little bit more guidance from council as to which alternative for sewer rates that you all would like to consider moving forward with for the Proposition 218. I'm going to share my screen now, so give me just a second to make sure it streams okay. Let me know if everybody can see.
Yes.
Can see it online.
Terrific. So I don't want anybody to be alarmed. I only have about 11 or 12 slides of substance here. But I want to start by obviously giving you kind of an agenda of what I'm going to talk about today. The first thing I'm going to do is just give a brief introduction of rates and fees and how we go about doing what we do to make sure that we're in compliance with, of course, all legal requirements as well as policies and things of that nature. Then I'm going to dive into components of the study itself, which include the revenue requirement analysis, the cost of service, rate design, and then I think you'll be curious to see how these rate design alternatives that we've developed will impact customers, and we're going to do that through customer bill impacts. Then, of course, we'll have questions and answers at the end, but if at any point we need to stop and have some dialogue, I'm totally okay with that. I don't want this to feel like a lecture. I want it to be more of, your standard working session, as you all just did a great job during the recycled water conversation. So to get started, I'd like to run you kind of through our step-by-step approach. The first thing we do when we are contracted, I sat down, had a kickoff meeting with both Michael as well as Robert, and we discussed a lot of things, from data to internal policies to external policies, existing contracts. We also reviewed the existing rate structure, and that really gives us our foundation for how we're going to move forward and address things. The next thing we did is we took all of that information that we requested from city staff, and we essentially put it into a format that is usable for us. And what that's doing, I like to say at the end of the day, is it's helping us make sure that we have our checkbook balanced at the end of the day. Are our revenues meeting or exceeding our expenses? That's the revenue requirement analysis. That tells us how much we need to get. Next, we look at demand, or in this case, on the sewer side, we look at flows. We look at not only the quantity of flow, but we also look at strength characteristics by customer class. That's very important as we end up heading into our cost of service analysis. So what I'd like you to think of is revenue requirement tells us how much money we need to get in order to kind of balance all of our costs. The next thing that we go into with the help of the demand analysis is cost of service. Cost of service tells us who we need to get it from. Do I need to get it more from my residential customers? Do I need to get more of it from my single family, my multifamily? Or do I need to get more of it from my restaurants? Or do I need to get more of it from my other customers' classes, such as industrial or septic tanks? So that's what the cost of service analysis helps us do. Next, we kind of think of rate design as, okay, how are we going to get it? Are we going to charge a fixed charge? Are we going to charge a volumetric charge? How are we going to get the money we need to get from each one of our customer classes? And lastly, but probably one of the most important things, of course, is public outreach and messaging. We need to be able to bring to our ratepayers helpful information that helps them understand, okay, how much are things costing and why is my bill going up and what is that going towards? So I think that's a very oftentimes overlooked component of these rate studies, but can be one of the most important as you work through, such a complex and really expensive process. Any questions so far?
No, we're good. Thank you.
Awesome. So let's dive into the revenue requirement analysis. What I've done here is created two charts, graphs for you here, and I'm going to explain them, so don't be alarmed. The chart on the left is what we refer to as our financial forecast. And those stacked bar graphs that have different colors, those represent the expenses in each one of your fiscal years that we were provided with and that you're going to have to, are being projected over the course of 5 years. So you can see those expenses, they tend to grow over time from fiscal year 2024 to fiscal year 2028. The next thing I want to bring your attention to is the total revenues, which seems to be that brownish line that is touching the tips of those stacked bar graphs. And what that's telling you is your revenue is meeting your expenses. So those percentages are the revenue increase required in order for our revenues to meet our expenditures. And you can see in that first year, fiscal year 2024, we have the 32.5%, followed by another 32.5% for 2025, and then the subsequent 8.5%. So if I were to raise revenues higher than what you see here, you would expect there to be a little bit of a gap in between the brown line and the stacked bar graphs. So you can see right here that our revenues are just meeting our expenses. And it gets a little more detailed on that graph on the right-hand side where we start talking about reserve fund balances. So what I've done is I've kind of broken out what we have as far as the operating fund versus the wastewater treatment versus sewer revolving fund. So really what the graph on the left is referring to, more or less, is the orange bar on the right-hand side. A lot of those other reserve fund balances are kind of untouchable for us, and it's not really available for us. So the primary target for us is that black dotted orange line on the right-hand graph that tells us where we need to be and what we're targeting. And then those orange bars on the right-hand side, they tell you how many days of operations and maintenance you have in reserve. So you can see we start out in fiscal year 2024 with about 55 days just for the orange bar. And then we go up to 71, and then of course we draw down on a little bit of our reserves there. And we end up in 2028 with about 129 days of O&M in reserve. But we also have on top of that some of that wastewater treatment facility capital and sewer revolving fund capital. So this is just a snapshot of the first 5 years, which is what we're referring to as our rate setting period. And again, I want you really to focus on the fact that we're really just trying to raise revenues so that we can meet expenditures, so that we're not drawing down our operating fund balance too low. Questions on this? So just kind of a snapshot of the detailed numbers that we're going to go through.
Any questions? None? Okay. No questions?
Terrific. Michael, is everybody awake? I'm ready for some tough ones.
Yes, they are.
All right, good. Next, we move on to the cost of service. Cost of service, again, tells us who we need to get it from. We want to make sure that those costs that are attributed to residential customers are being charged appropriately, and we want to figure out how much that is. So cost of service principles are really a guideline in our industry that help us essentially take the revenue requirement and separate it into different buckets. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that our rates are cost-based, and we want to make sure that they sufficiently recover our ability to build, operate, maintain, and reinvest in this system, whether it be sewer, water, recycled water. Those are the primary function of what we want them to do, and we have to pay for that. We want to make sure that they're simple and easily understood. We don't want anything that's too complex or overly cumbersome because it's hard to implement, and on top of that, it's hard to explain. So the simpler we can keep it, usually the better. Now, don't get me wrong, water budgets can become very complex on the water side of things. Certainly sewer, rates can become complex as we want to make them, but we try to keep it as simple as possible for as long as possible. Next, we get back to that fair and equitable language. We want to make sure everybody's paying their fair and proportionate share, which leads me into the fourth item there, which is the avoidance of discrimination or subsidies within the rates. We want to make sure not only is residential paying its fair share and commercial, but we also want to make sure that the customers within the residential class, which we call intra-class inequities, they're also being tended to as well. And then lastly, of course, and I'm sure your legal counsel would agree with us, we want to make sure that whatever we're recommending is legal and defensible. We have to be able to tie our rates to what they refer to as a rational cost nexus, really just meaning, are the costs that we're incurring being charged appropriately to the customers, and that's the rate they're paying. So those are the principles that kind of guide us. Again, I've given an example here of, I like to think of this as, we have this big bucket of Skittles, right? And those are kind of our revenue requirement or our costs. Well, we need to separate those out into what we refer to as functional categories. And once we do that, then we can start assigning them to customer classes based on their usage of the system. So I'm going to dive right in here. This is essentially the culmination of a lot of different financial division, a lot of allocation of costs. And at the end of the day, the column that you see in the middle of the chart here is what we refer to as revenue under existing rates. What this means is that these various customer classes are currently collecting this specific amount of revenue under your existing rates. And then what we've done is we've selected a test year of 2028. So that's not next year, but it's 5 years from now. And the reason we did that is because we want to make sure that we give you 5 years of rates for the Prop 218, and you have the option to adopt those, but you also have the option to modify them should you need to, and you want to redo kind of the whole process, you can. But what this graph is telling you is that our overall revenue increase that we need, and remember, I'm going to go back a couple slides here. It's a compounded percentage of the revenue increases that, apologies, the revenue increases that you see here on the left-hand side of this graph. So if we compound those 32.5% plus 3 8.5%, what we end up with on a compound basis over the 5-year period is approximately a 124.4% increase over 5 years. So we are increasing revenue that you're getting from your existing rates of about 7.4 million, all the way up to 16.5 million. And you can see in the change column there, which customer classes are bearing the largest or the smallest proportion of that cost of service analysis. I want to stop here because this slide is really the result of the cost of service analysis, and usually there's good discussion and questions here.
Is there any questions on behalf of council members?
Was that scenario 3 you just explained?
I'm sorry?
Well, for the sewer rates, just the numbers mirrored the 32.5 across the 8.5, scenario 3. Is that?
Yeah, so we're gonna lead into rate design where we talk about that, but I think what's important to take from this slide is that all 3 of those alternatives, those rate alternatives that we're gonna go through, they will produce that $16.5 million, regardless of which alternative you decide to go with. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Another question.
Please, go ahead, council member.
If you went back a few slides to the bar graphs, you were showing that we're currently meeting our costs with revenue, because that's why the brown line is right there at the top. Is that correct on the financial forecast?
Yeah, so you are correct with these proposed revenue increases. If you do them, this is what it would look like. Now, I could show you a similar graph with 0% revenue increases, and what that would show you is that brown dotted line of total revenues would be well below those stacked graphs. Does that make sense?
It does. And even with the increases in the proposed increases in fees for these services, the chart on the right, the orange line, we're still going to see a reduction in days of fund balances until 2028, when we'll be back at 129 days. So at any time in 2025, 26, and 27, will these reserve fund balances, as shown here, be too low and make us out of compliance with any kind of statutory fund balance requirement?
Great, it's a great question, and I'll answer it first, and then I'll let Michael add anything he'd like to. But because of what you have in total available funds there, you are not in what I would call, you're not in violation of any internal or external policies that you have. Now, I don't always like to see the sewer operating fund reserves below about 90 days, but because you have other funds kind of sitting around there, I'm not too concerned with it. Michael, did you want to add anything?
No, great, thank you.
Does that help answer your question, council member?
It does. Can you go back to the current slide that you were on?
Yeah.
And I think Councilmember Meister brought it up. So we're seeing an 89% increase, or 124% total increase in cost of service. Why are we seeing such an inflated cost over the next 5 years? Is this the legacy of the 10 years where we haven't raised rates that are all just catching up to us now? I mean, it seems like, holy smokes, what did we just buy that's going to cost us all this extra money?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's kind of a two-part answer for me. The first would be, of course, yeah, we haven't done a cost of service-based study since 2003. So if we're doing the math there, that's about 20 years, right? And it's not that you haven't raised revenue increase, right? I believe you guys have over that time period. But it's a function of kind of writing what the characteristics are today versus what they were back in 2003 for your customers and your demographics in your city. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
I'd like to add two specific things. I heard a council member bring up the Porter Vista. By contract, we are not really doing a cost of service for Porter Vista. What we're doing there is essentially taking the overall revenue increase and applying that to their rates. So you'll see that Porter Vista's overall increase of 124.2 is almost spot on with the overall, it's just a difference of rounding really, of the overall total increase of 124.4. And then the other thing I'd like to point out is one of the reasons for this study that Michael and Robert and I talked about was in regards to septic tanks. I was told that septic tankers were really picking you all off, meaning they were driving out of their way to come dump at your plant because your rates were so much lower than the rest of the surrounding areas. And I think this cost of service kind of shows that they're grossly undercharged currently.
Any other comment or any question, council members?
Yeah, I had a brief question. Back to the Porta Vista. So although their rates will be increased, they're not part of this incremental increases until later in 2028? Is that?
No, they would be subject to the annual increases that I showed on that bar chart graph.
Okay.
Each and every year. I'm just showing you basically your revenue that you're currently getting from them is around 200K. By 2028, if we increase all the proposed revenues, you would eventually be getting almost almost 450,000 from them if we do all those annual increases.
Okay, yeah, they weren't specifically, there wasn't a percentage on them, so I didn't know what that increase was for them. And also, is there a way to, are we metering what we are servicing from them? Because I saw everybody else there was a breakdown on how much we were serving, but for them, there's no numbers on them for what's.
I would have to defer to Michael that question. I'm not aware of their actual flows. I'm just aware of the revenue you receive from them.
No, it's a good question. So we've been talking about that internally on the availability of a meter for that lift station. So currently, all their flows go into a single lift station that the city maintenance and maintains at a reimbursement billing back to Porta Vista. And so we've been evaluating that, how to calculate their contribution of flows. And this will also require some amendments to the agreement that's with Porta Vista. So although the 218 process goes similar within the city, it's going to be a little bit different with Porta Vista because then they will have to go through a 218 process to implement the rate. So there's still more work to do on that. But it will, as you can see in the rate structure, we've done our best to bridge the rate increases similar to what our customers will see. And when that agreement gets amended, I'm sure there's going to be additional conversation to that as well.
Okay, thank you for that.
Council members, did you have any comment or questions for right now?
Why, explain to me why, and maybe Michael Knight, why do we have to raise it 124%?
So it really comes down to the fact that you have significant capital expenditures coming online soon, and you haven't really kept pace with the costs that you're incurring because things are costing more and more. You've got more people discharging to your system than you have in the past. And as a result, we need to raise those revenue increases to prepare you for now and into the future. We have significant capital requirements coming down the road that I can let Michael speak to.
Please go ahead.
And I think that, to your point, was what you were saying, which is, this is showing, so in 2028, what they're saying is that the cost of sewer is going to be $16 million, and right now you're collecting 73. And and based upon what you were saying, who's paying for what? Single-family residential needs to pay their proportional share of those costs. This is how much they have to pay.
Yeah, and it's a great point because I believe it's 80 to 85% of your system resides in the single-family residential class.
So again, this is a fee, so the service that's provided and the cost to do it is what is the responsibility of the ratepayer.
Yeah, it theoretically should be a pass-through plus some policy stuff for debt coverage ratios, as well as some reserves in case a main line breaks or, something happens.
And to his point, the glaring one here is that we're collecting $94,000 from the folks driving the septic trucks out to and they really should be paying what the cost really of the impact of treating that is almost $1 million. I mean, they're paying 10% of what that cost would be 5 years from now.
Great point, and it's a combination of the amount of flow that they're discharging to you, but it's also a combination of their strengths. Your septic tankers have an extremely high amount of strength compared to your other customer classes.
I can appreciate, I'm going to make comment because I'm going to refer to the packet that we received under 5.2, the multifamily residential and trailer parks. There were alternatives that were outlined for monthly costs from 2023 to where it would be for 2027, 2028. And it has a breakdown and graphics for alternative 1, alternative 2, and alternative 3. Then I'm looking at the final one that gives all of the alternatives side by side next to it. And as you were having this conversation, I was trying to connect the dot as to when I asked to be educated as to explain alternative 1 and alternative 2 to me, and it's broken down and there are graphics in each one that kind of gives you the dollar amount of the monthly sewer bill, and it takes it up to where it would be. So I want to thank you for that, but I see it here, and I know those are questions that we all have, especially when it pertains to the sewer districts,
Absolutely.
the bill. Any comment on, Vice Mayor, did you have any comment? I was just chiming in because as the conversations were going on, I know that we had received something in our packet and looking at how they're broken down with the percentages over the period. Does anyone have any questions? Councilmember Wyrock, I can't see you on here because, did you have any questions?
I really appreciate hearing about great hope for the last bullet point on messaging to the community. There's a lot of people that have been listening in tonight and participating in this study session that, it's a price of a sandwich, twice a month at lunchtime. But there's a lot of residents that this is really going to pitch. And we have a lot of really dedicated people who work hard day in and day out and get their kids to school. And they're just barely making it. And all of a sudden say, you're going to go from $26 to $36 in just a couple of years, or whatever the trend is. I think I've seen how there. For a trailer park, maybe you see my mom at a trailer park, from $25 a month to $50 a month in 5 short years. Well, maybe their income will go up. So I'm just looking forward to hearing about how best decides to do the big it just pretty much.
Thank you. Councilmember
Great
Belton?
piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Belton, you had a comment, question?
Yeah, just a brief comment. Obviously, in the study, it was done 20 years ago, and reading on that, there was the suggestion that the rates needed to be raised, and it's unfortunate at that time, the council at that time chose not to do anything about that. I don't know what the consensus was, and unfortunately, all these years later, we got that can that got kicked down. So this isn't a matter of what we want to do, it's a matter of was given to us.
Those decisions get more expensive as time goes by.
As time goes on,
or
and it's.
non-decisions.
it's hard to.
It's like the park impact fee, right? We don't want to charge that. And
Yeah,
then in
we
the end,
want
you
the
get there and go, well,
service.
why don't we have any money for parks? Well, because we didn't charge
We
it.
want this service, but I also appreciate in the packet, and I was on social media and publicly telling people as much as possible, please read this information, because it's not a matter of what percentage needs to be raised, it's a justification of why. And so I really appreciate the time to explain all these costs. And one little item that jumped out was in, I believe it was in 1998, it was a pickup truck that was bought for $15,000. What would that truck cost now if we were to go buy it? So these are compounded costs, and it's unfortunate that this wasn't incrementally done, whether it's 8% or 10% here and there, that all of a sudden it's this big chunk that our residents, we want quality of service. We want to know that everything is operating at the, it'd be cost effective, that we have the technology, equipment, is efficient and all that stuff. And unfortunately, it's going to cost. Somebody has to pay this bill somewhere. We can't, like the state, just write a note and say, okay, we'll pay this in the future. It's the bill's coming due. So I just appreciate this packet as much as it was a struggle to understand it. It was very thorough and helped, so thank you.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Please, go ahead.
And to second what Don was kind of getting at there, we're living in a recession, even though our federal government changed the definition of a recession. We are in the midst of one, and some economics say that the cost of living has gone up per family household $750 a month, and so to think that between wastewater, wastewater and solid waste, we're going to raise the bill $50 a month is going to be impactful, right? Especially to the lower income constituents. At the same time, Raymond or Councilman Beltran makes a good point, and something 20 years ago they weren't thinking about is Teapot Dome dump closing, right? And so the cost of hauling, well, I guess we're on sewage right now, huh?
Sewage right
Yeah.
now.
So okay.
That's okay.
Well, but it's,
Yeah, it'll lead-
Yeah, and
it'll lead
so
into-
it's hard to, I guess you think we're in the highest tax city in the county and in the state, for that matter, one of the highest tax cities, and thinking we're going to raise the price 124%. How is that going to sit with our constituents? Tough decisions to make. I wonder if there's maybe a 10-year plan of raising the rates instead of 5 to ease. Just my thoughts.
Well, I do want to address that, because we did look at a 10-year financial plan. But for Prop 218, we can only kind of adopt, if you will, the 5-year maximum. So that's why 5 is being presented to you now. And I will tell you, there wasn't much relief. I mean, this is kind of what needs to happen in order to kind of right the ship so far. So I understand what you're saying about kind of lessening that load and trying to take some pressure off. We did do that to the extent we could. We still required, some revenue increases pretty substantially, and we did have some debt issuances in order to kind of try to give some relief there. So I don't want you to think we did this all on rates. It's a balancing act, and we did try to alleviate that to the extent possible.
Thank you for that. Vice Mayor, did you have any comment?
Just good discussion. It's very helpful. I don't have any questions right now.
Thank you. As I'm looking at the graph and then I'm looking at the information that was sent to us, this is tough, for all of us, especially when it pertains to household and other businesses with regard to the sewer rates. Educate me on alternative 3.
Cody, were you going to progress through? I didn't want to jump ahead to discuss the rate structures, or?
Yeah, so I think what I'd like to do is go back to alternative 3 if I can, and just give a little explanation. I have to give explanation for alternative 1 and 2 real quickly, if you don't mind.
Okay,
And it'll help
please
lead
do.
us into rate alternative 3, which I think might be a preferred option for several reasons. The first thing I want to say is that the alternative one structure presented here today, that really recovers the class cost of service, if you will, and it maintains the differential charged between single-family and multifamily trailer park, which I have a hard time as your consultant understanding where the 95% number came from. And the reason I do have a problem trying to come up with something to justify that is I don't know what the difference is between the strengths of single-family versus multifamily versus trailer park, because they're the same. So in my mind, if we have this justification for charging them, 95% of single family, I would want to have something to stand on to do that. So I presented it as an option here for you. Although, it's something you can consider, you still are going to see those large jumps from your existing rates to your first fiscal year in 23-24. And again, we did our best to try to, keep that as minimal as possible, but our revenues are just not covering our expenses at this time. So that leads me into alternative two. Alternative two is what I refer to as strictly cost of service based. Now, what this means is I've taken into consideration all of the costs that you have, and I've separated them and applied them to flows, strengths, and taken out of the equation the 95% rule for multifamily and trailer park. So if we were to go on a strictly cost of service based rate, you would see multifamily's rate go down to the 1990 in that first year. And eventually, it catches up with your existing rate, but I think that, you're doing so at the detriment of your single family residential customers, which are the majority of your, ratepayer base. So I don't know what council's thoughts are on that, but I was hired, Corolla was hired to present the cost of service option. So that's what's been done here. Now, in discussions with Michael and his team, we did come up with an alternative 3 that we felt was justifiable. And what we did there is we said, look, we don't see any difference in strengths or usage or costs for single family, multifamily, and trailer park. Why don't we just wrap them all up, charge them a single rate called residential, and see what that looks like? And you can see that multifamily and trailer parks, if you consider their existing rate, they go up, a little bit there, as does single family residential, but that buffer is kind of taken off of a single subclass, if you will, by using alternative 3 rate structure. And talks with city staff, and I believe, Michael can talk about the legal counsel opinion there, but I feel pretty confident saying, standing up in front of somebody and saying there's no difference in characteristics of the usage, so I'm okay grouping them together and calling it a residential class.
Thank you. Mr. Knight?
I couldn't have said it better.
Okay, that's why I was looking at you. Yeah, I appreciate that. I really appreciate the information, especially with this alternative. I really wanted to see how the numbers would align with the others. And, we want to think of everyone in our city, of all the constituents and everybody that will be under this umbrella, especially for the rates that it applies. I'm only one person, but I'm looking at alternative 3. Comments on behalf, Councilmember Wyrock, I'll start with you because I can't see you on the screen. Do you have any comment on this one?
Could you pull it back up?
Oh, sorry, yep, no problem.
There you go. Thank you very much. So I'm looking at the commercial. We have a lot of small businesses, and in and around the city. And if they happen to live in town too, the household rates are going to go up. The commercial rates are going to go up, and trying to put my head around how we can maybe help them out. I applaud the city for putting in low flow faucets in our public bathrooms. And I'm not sure about all the ordinance. Sure, it'd be nice if we had streamlined permit process with our homework. They come and get a permit to redo their bathrooms and send less sewage down the line if they transfer a property and negotiate transactions. I know we send one of things to have low flow systems in their house with faucets and toilets that they should have to change out. If our residents can change out and there's nothing we don't have from us, I just wish that we could market some type of opportunity for them to have a discount when their components rate increase if they want to modernize it. It's just that they don't know. You know, I'm seeing 1,000 businesses that can do this. They're actually on it. We're actually at 2,500, you know, it's a right for them. You know, it's just a lot of information and it's good information.
Councilmember Wyrock, it's very difficult and we can't really hear all of your conversation. Is there a comment to the information that was presented? In which direction you would like to go with the alternatives that were presented?
It does mean I'm moving a lot of it. You can generate a mutual lot of it. Because I heard that any of it 5 years down the road.
I didn't understand anything.
Councilmember, you might want to maybe try turning your camera off and see if it gets a little bit better. For some reason, the audio is really all of a sudden, and it went kind of from bad to worse, so we're catching like every other word.
Councilmember Meister?
Oh.
Oh, here he. Oh, he muted? Okay.
Okay. Darn it, now I'm all lost. I favor alternative 3 as well. That's, I found out some of my confusion as we're going here. This is just sewage. It has nothing to do with
Correct.
treated water.
It's just a.
Okay, I am, where I was asking those questions earlier, I was mixing these two. So I just had my own aha moment. Thank you.
Councilmember Beltran?
Looking at and going to Councilman Meister's comment earlier about the recycled water as far as people paying for their share, alternative 2 was the one that stuck out to me the most because it's based on it represents the actual cost of the service. It would affect me the most because I'm a single family home, but I understand I'm the bulk user of it and what have you. But to evenly, I guess I just think of people in multifamily homes or in trailer parks. Typically, there's a financial situation with those circumstances, and seeing some of the rates, I know people are on fixed incomes, whether it's Social Security or disability, and to see some of these rates I've already seen people affected with the heat, and they're not able to run their air conditioner as much as they want because their utility bill they can't afford. So I'm comfortable in where I'm at in my single-family residence, where I think those are people that might have, I'm not saying they have disposable income or this will be easier for them, but they're definitely in a little bit more blessed position than maybe others. And so the alternative 2 was the one that spoke to me based on the actual service costs. The other ones are justifiable too. Everybody's sharing in the rates. But just to me, 2 was the one that spoke to me the most. So that's my comment for that. Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
I think there's a couple things to consider. I think my biggest thing is, how this is going to impact our community and the residents overall. So I'm still going through 2 and 3. Those are the two that I'm kind of looking at back and forth. I think the discussion and the questions are helping to kind of see the breakdown of where the actual differences are. I'm a little bit leaning towards the number 3, but, trying to consider the best option for cost as it starts in 24, but also then goes forward throughout the 5 years. I guess my question is, do we need to have a consensus this evening on which option for this?
Just to provide, if you may, Cody, could you present that bar graph that shows the pooling? So in this discussion, we did go through a process to evaluate 20 other agencies. And in those 20 agencies, the light blue bar graphs are agencies that do provide residential use. The dark blue agencies do not provide a mixed residential use. And then if you look, the alternatives are also listed in there. And then if you look at the pooled agencies that we looked at, the average price is listed in the middle there at the orange bar, 3804. So just some additional information for consideration when you look across 20 agencies that surround us.
Turn it up 3. Yeah.
And I will tell you that there are agencies that are actively in rate evaluations currently, which was a result of when we pooled these numbers, they provided us current numbers, but they're actively in rate evaluations.
I guess for me, just looking at locking something in for 5 years, we don't know. I mean, we hear about COVID coming back and some places being affected by that. And we're going like, who knows what's going to happen in 5 years from now, but I understand that there's a need, regardless of what happens with the economy. We have an election coming up next year. Who knows where that will affect taxes and what have you. So it's really hard to lock in rates for 5 years for some income brackets, not knowing what the cost of living and stuff being affected.
What it's worth, just so you know, you wouldn't necessarily be locking it in.
Oh.
What we generally recommend is, just because this process is so laborious, a Prop 218 process, the recommendation is generally adopt a schedule that takes you out 5 years. Does that mean you have to wait those 5 years to go
Okay.
back and reevaluate?
Okay.
Absolutely not.
No.
Thank you, that gives some wiggle
You're
room,
welcome.
because I'm like, is there
Yeah,
some
no.
wiggle room in 2 years?
It's not, this is it,
Okay.
and you have there's no going back, so, yeah.
Well, knowing that we're below average, if not the low end, there's definitely some room to increase. It's just seeing the initial note. So I appreciate that there is some wiggle room in 2 years, 3 years that we can reevaluate. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and thank you for showing this slide, Mike, because this really shows what alternative 2 does to the single-family monthly sewer rates for those families. Myself, I'm one, and I've had to make many cutbacks because of the economy today. So I think being fair across the board is the right way to do it with alternative 3. That's where I'm lying.
And I appreciate that, because as I looked at the overall picture and I looked at the business, and I do understand, because just in my district and others, not everybody can immediately go into, oh yes, and look at their bill and say, I have to pay this. And I'm looking at this, over the years, we've had a lot of annexations, and this is where it's been at. So you have to think about that in itself. A lot of the annexations, some of them are not all connected to the sewer and the water, which you want to fix the sewer first before they get connected to the water, because you don't want to mess up the roads. So once again, And as I looked at it, as I was wanting to be educated on the alternative, I'm in the direction of alternative 3. Vice Mayor?
Yes, 3.
I heard a 3, okay, that's Councilmember Wyrock. Thank you for coming in.
evening.
And thank you for
Good
the
evening,
draft.
everybody, again.
Oh, we can hear you clearly. Thank you. And he's like, Councilmember Belton, did we get yours?
Yeah, mine still is, my consensus is 2, just off the top of my head. If there was a secondary choice, to me, it would be 1, just a flat rate for everybody, equal across, so. But it would be 2 for me.
But the consensus will be 3.
Yeah, one's everybody's the same as 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're referring to alternative 3. Alternative 1 would just be your existing rate structure where multifamily and trailer park is 95% of single family.
I'm looking at the wrong one, thank you.
That's okay. We're all agreeable to give staff recommendation on number 3, and that will lead us into solid waste. Okay.
Cody, sounds like we have consensus. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
Good night.
Let me change my notes here.
Yeah, shift to that page. Solid waste now.
With that being said, I'd like to introduce William Schoen with R3. They assisted us with our solid waste evaluations, and he has a presentation to provide for us tonight. William, would you like to drive, or do you want me to put your presentation up?
Yeah, if you can put it up, Michael. I don't think I have access to it on my laptop.
Thank you.
So we've saved the best for last, hopefully. I don't see that, Michael. Has it been,
Oh, I'm sorry, let me share my screen. Sorry about that.
and can you show the view as just the normal view? There we go. Great. Well, thank you, council members. Again, as Michael said, I'm William Schoen with R3 Consulting Group. I appreciate the opportunity to present the results of our financial plan and rate study. Our work started more than 3 years ago, so it's been a while coming, but we covered quite a lot of topics and hopefully have provided information that is going to support the divisions moving forward effectively into the future. Next slide, Michael. What I'd like to cover today is go over our project work scope and objectives, talk about our major findings, including the additional costs that we've identified that are necessary to bring the division's solid waste operations up to industry standards, and then also to comply with SB 1383 organic material recycling requirements, which is a major change that's occurred in the solid waste industry over the last several years. In looking at the solid waste rates, we conducted a rate survey of, I think, almost 20 jurisdictions in the region, compared those to the city's existing rates. So we'll go over that rate survey. All of that in support of looking at what rate adjustments are necessary for the division to meet its, effectively meet its revenue requirement going forward. Again, provided the funding for the additional costs that are required to bring the operations up to industry standards and comply with 1383. We presented a number of scenarios. We'll go over those. We'll also talk a little bit about multiple versus same-day residential collection service. Those are two different structures for that collection service. And also the outsourcing of collection services to the private sector. Go over an overview of that and the pros and cons. Next slide, Michael. So our project really had four main tasks. The first was a solid waste performance review. We reviewed the current operations of the division and identified opportunities for improvement. The second was our financial plan and rate study. We developed a 10-year financial rate model, looked at various 5-year rate adjustment scenarios, that would satisfy, again, the division's revenue requirements over the next 5 years. We also provided a range of SB 1383 compliance services. Again, SB 1383 is recent legislation that effectively requires both residential and commercial accounts to have organic collection services. Really, the large component of that is adding food waste to both residential collection and commercial collection services, but there's also quite a few other requirements of that legislation. It's an unfunded mandate with significant costs, so there are significant additional costs that the division is going to incur in complying with SB 1383. And then the last task was reviewing and assessing the outsourcing of municipal collection operations to the private sector, looking at the pros and cons of outsourcing and what that might mean, or the potential for that as it relates to the city's collection operations. Next slide, Michael. So our major findings, our first finding I think is very encouraging in that the division is doing a very good job with the available resources they have. They've done almost a phenomenal job. The problem is that those resources that they have are not adequate to support an operation that's in line with industry standards for safety, customer service, and operational performance. Additionally, there's, like I just mentioned, significant additional resources that are needed to comply with SB 1383. The city's residential rate, which is now $17.85 per month, those rates are among the lowest, if not the lowest in the region. And your rates have not been increased since 2006, more than 15 years, and are simply not sufficient to support what the division needs at this point to operate effectively going forward and to comply with SB 1383. Additional funding is required for a range of services. One, there's additional staffing, vehicles, and other resources that are needed, again, to bring the operation up to industry standards. Those are estimated at a little more than $500,000 per year. The resources needed to comply with SB 1383 are projected at more than $1 million annually, $1.2 million. There's additional funding that's required to replace vehicles as scheduled. The fleet is relatively old and needs to be replaced. That cost equals about $500,000 annually for the next 5 years to replace those vehicles and fund a vehicle replacement reserve so that you can meet your scheduled funding requirements going on into the future. Additionally, there's funding needed to expand the office and the existing maintenance facilities, and also improve the green waste and recycling transfer stations, another $300,000 annually. Additional funding is also needed to bring the operating reserves up to an appropriate level. We typically recommend operating reserves, basically a rainy day fund, on the order of perhaps 2 or 3 months of actual expenses. And then there's costs to offset increased inflation. Again, particularly recently, inflation has gone up significantly, and solid waste costs have gone up generally even higher than inflation, as far as vehicles and other fuel and other things specific to solid waste. So there's a significant cost just to stay equal with inflation. So I mentioned the rate survey that we conducted. This is, I think we looked at 18 other jurisdictions, which are all listed here. Again, Porterville's rate, which was first established or last established in 2006, is $17.85 per month. That's the lowest of these 18 jurisdictions that we've surveyed. If you go down to the bottom, the average rate of those jurisdictions is $27.81 in comparison to Porterville's rate of $17.85. So almost $10, the average is almost $10 more than your current rate. More than 50% higher than your current rate. So again, I think there's a lot to be said in terms of the division's ability to have kept operations going without the resources that it needs. But clearly, there's additional funding that's required. And even, I'm going to talk about those scenarios in just a minute, and we're talking about or suggesting a 50% overall rate increase to really bring revenues up to where they need to be. Even with a 50% rate increase, you can see here the city's residential rate is still going to be less than the average in these other jurisdictions. And this rate survey is a couple of years old, so many of these rates I expect have gone up, which would put the city in even a better position. So while we're looking at a significant rate increase, city's rates are still going to be extremely competitive and within the range of those, even less than those in the surrounding region. Next slide, Michael. So our major findings in terms of the rate adjustment scenarios, as I mentioned, a rate increase on the order of about 50% is required to meet the operational requirements, bring the division up to industry standards and comply with 1383. You have several options with respect to the timing and amount of rate adjustments to get you to that 50% overall rate adjustment. And we've prepared a number of rate adjustment scenarios laying out both differences in both the timing and the amount of rate adjustments over the next 3 years, each of which brings the division basically to the same point at the end of that 5-year planning period. And next slide. So these are the scenarios that we looked at. Scenario 1 is simply where the division is now and where it would be in 5 years if you made no rate increase. And you can see, immediately in that first row where it turns to red, you go into a significant operating deficit, and that just gets worse over time. So clearly, the do-nothing alternative is really not an option as we see it. Scenario number 2 looks at a 50% rate increase this year, 23-24, which would then be followed by annual rate adjustments of 5%. Those are intended to represent inflationary adjustments. So really a large 50% one-time increase, 5% annual increases over the next 5 years. You can see at the end of the 5 years, that circled 21%, that's the operating reserves. As I mentioned earlier, 2 to 3 months is what we think is generally a reasonable level of operating reserves, rainy day fund. 21% is right in that range. So 50% and then 5% annually thereafter for the next 5 years will put the division in good stead over the next 5 years. Scenario 3, instead of that 50% rate increase, we would look at a 30% rate increase this year, a 25% rate increase next year, and then 3 years of 5% rate adjustments. That gets you to a 22% operating reserve. Again, generally the same as scenario 2. The last scenario, scenario 4, again, a smaller rate adjustment this year, 25%, 25% rate adjustment next year, 10% in fiscal year 25-26, and then 5% 26-27 and 27-28, and that gets you again to a 18% operating reserve. So really, each of these last 3 scenarios, 2, 3, and 4, get you to the same general position at the end of the 3 years. Scenario 1 is what we're suggesting you consider, in that it makes you whole from the beginning going forward. But you do have options in terms of a lesser rate increase this year, spreading that over a number of years. But really, you need to take some action if you want the division to operate, consistent with industry standards, in terms of safety, customer service, and productivity, and comply with 1383. You need to make the investment in the division. Even at 50%, as I mentioned earlier, your residential rate is still going to be less than the average of the residential rates throughout the region. So nobody likes a huge rate increase, but it isn't as if that's going to put you, as an outlier in terms of where you compare to the region. You're going to be right in there, less than the average, and we'll have provided the resources, financial resources that the division needs to move forward effectively. I'm going to leave it there because I'm sure you may have a lot of questions or discussions before we go on. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. That's a lot of information, especially with scenarios. And I'm going to bring it to council members because as I'm looking at this, I'm processing. Councilmember Wyrock, are you on and have any comment?
Yeah. Thank you. Great scenarios. I don't believe scenario 1 is prudent. Loss of $19 million is just not good stewardship. I like adequate reserves. I like the way scenario 2 looks green across the board, and 3 and 4 is a little bit of a pinch point initially, but we recover well with a good reserve and, you know, a fee of, you know, the low $30 range for all 3 of these. So, you know, I'm pretty comfortable with all of them, but I just like high reserve. So for me, scenario 3 looks good, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Beltran?
Yeah, scenario 3 was the one that looked the most attractive overall for me. My only question is, with these rate increases, as I was looking through towards the end of the study, this wouldn't implement necessarily all of the findings. It was just highlighting some of the maybe more urgent, which I think it was safety. I think there was 3 that stuck out the most. But with this revenue increase, was this gonna do all of the bring it up to industry standards? Was that part of that expense that needed to be raised?
That's the intent.
Okay.
You know, it provides both additional staff and vehicles, as well as technology and resources for increased safety and safety training, customer service technology. So it also provides sufficient funding for both your equipment replacement and capital reserves based on your scheduled replacement. So this is intended to do everything that is needed at this point in terms of both providing the resources to move in consistent with the industry standards, as well as 1383 compliance.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I was kind of surprised at some of the recommendations that we didn't have already. I was really kind of surprised, but maybe I shouldn't be, since we haven't raised rates in a while and didn't have the funds to do it. So, but there was some great recommendations that I'm, again, surprised that some of them weren't in practice, but I understand why now. I do have a question on the privatization of this. I saw that I believe it's probably a little bit less than 10% of municipalities do their own solid waste operation. Do you have a figure, let's say in the last 10 years, of any municipality that did go to privatization that ended up having to take it back? Do you have a figure on that?
I do talk about privatization in just a slide or two, but you know, that privatized and took it back, no. You know, although outside of California, I know there's a couple of small, I think Port Angeles, Washington is looking at that, but that is really, those are an anomaly. And I think, you know, if the city, especially a city of your size, if you get out of solid waste, you really, you know, getting back into it is a huge capital expense. There's lots of other issues. No, I think is the simple answer, that once you're out of it, I think, you know, there's very little ability to get back into it effectively.
Yeah, I believe we experienced
the
it.
resources, the financial, you know, one vehicle is approaching, you know, $350,000, $400,000. The capital costs would just be huge.
I believe we experienced that with our water treatment plant at one point. It went private, and then there was some quality control issues and maintenance issues that we had to, and ended up costing the city more than we were prepared to. So we've experienced that on one side of it. So just, I didn't know
Boy, I forgot about that.
what, I know if we were to jump out and jump back in, we're dealing with that with our transportation right now. So it's not an animal I care to go down, but I did see the one thing that stood out was like, oh, this could be a net benefit to the taxpayers, but we lose control over that operation in our jurisdiction, which is, and once you let go of that, like you said, it's not something you want to get back.
Well, and you still have regulatory responsibility.
Oh, yeah, like
You-
half, it was 750,000 a
Yeah,
year. and-
so, which now you're no longer collecting revenue, so when you talk about, now you're allocating general fund money to offset that.
Well, I was just surprised how much information was in here that, I wouldn't say lean towards that, but was a lot of information on that side. I'm like, wow, why did they give us so much information on this? Because it's a scary thing to, I mean, it's an option, I guess, but.
Yeah, and this, So when this kind of comes full circle, when I joined the city in 2006, that was the conversation that was happening. I remember coming to my first council meetings and this debate was raging. It was raging, literally. There was Sunset, I think, was one of the carriers, and Waste Management certainly, and there was lots of overtures to assume it, and the issue that was happening at that time was recycling. In fact, we've spent a good 5 years wrestling through recycling, and that's been one of the, I mean, this is looking forward, if you look back, and I've shared this with the council before, and when you were newly elected, I said, this is the issue, probably burning hottest, because we are this is closest to being bankrupt of a specific operation, because it has to be treated as it's an enterprise, and it's its own utility, and simply because it's not generating enough revenue, and there was $1 million swing. I remember we used to be paid $500,000 a year for recyclables through Pena, and then the regulations changed, and now we are now paying $500,000 a year to somebody to take our recycling. And you have to do it. You can't send it to the landfill.
Porterville was one of the last to remaining to still be getting paid at the time that was happening. So I think Porterville was very lucky, actually, that it was able to maintain that sort of formula a little bit longer than a lot of jurisdictions, where a lot of jurisdictions were actually paying to have their recycling. So we knew it was coming, and now we're there.
And we were part of a joint powers authority under the CWMA and then that broke apart. City of Visalia used to be the administrator of it, and it became contentious over who was paying what to do what, and so it all dissolved, and so we now all have our own individual responsibilities for this.
So some of the mandates through the state, with the organic waste being one of them, I know I have to deal with that at my employer. Unfortunately, there's a lot of food waste that because it's packaged and already it's more time consuming to try and put it in there than just sit in the regular trash. So it's unfortunate the state mandates this, but it's not almost a cost-effective thing. It just sounds good on paper. I did have a question. Nothing in here was considered for, as far as grant funds. How much average, I don't know if you could do this yearly, or how often does like a capital project like the green waste or vehicle replacement, how often do we get funds? I mean, does that department get quite a few funds for projects like that?
So that's a very good comment. We do receive some bottle bill funds to the tune of $70,000, and we've applied those to outreach programs. We've applied those to providing additional documentation to businesses, those type of things. We have in the past received other grants for purchasing cans or bins, but they're not consecutive year grants, so they're hit and miss grant opportunities. But previously, we did receive CMAQ funds to purchase refuse trucks, which was a proportional share. I believe it was 20% match on the city to purchase CMAQ fund refuse trucks. And so that is one of the things that's prolonged the city's ability to maintain this low rate, is the fact that we were able to defer that equipment replacement at the time with grant funds to purchase vehicles. And with the focus on zero emission and transit applications, they moved away from that. So now it's a self-funded process to replace equipment at the end of its useful life.
Yeah, that was a great question. Mike and I were talking about this. We probably secured $10 million in CMAQ. I don't know how many refuse trucks were replaced under that program. I will tell you, we were the leader in Tulare County. And then what you've seen is that $6 million a year that comes to our county now is being allocated to roundabouts and zero electric buses and bike and ped projects, and that's just because that is federal funding. That's how those those programs have changed. And I've seen that change in my time. The mayor's neighborhood received sidewalks. You used to be able to use those funds for dust mitigation, and that's how we put it in curb, gutter, and sidewalk. Significant, Morton Avenue, if any of you remember Morton Avenue and in the county areas, on Morton Avenue, there was zero, I mean, there was dirt. And we were the last, City of Porterville was the last grantee of CMAQ to do, and that was that Morton Avenue. You know, we had to kind of beg and plead to get the 3 million, I think it was, whatever it was, so we could do Morton Avenue and get between Westwood and get curb, gutter, and sidewalk put in. But that's been the changing of because it's federally funds, you know, it used to be dust mitigation, then it was particulate 2.0 or whatever it was, and that's where the CNG stuff came in, and now it's morphed over the last 3 years, I would say, to roundabouts, and that's what we're doing. As the council's well aware, we have 2 roundabouts in the airport area that one of them's going to be $2 million of that. So instead of buying, you know, 4 refuse trucks, we get a $2 million traffic improvement with federal funds.
So yeah, grants are just far and few between, not reliable. And then the shift in funding that would go to trash or other vehicles or bins are all being shifted. Because we see that with transportation, everything's being shifted. So kind of bye-bye to that availability. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Meister?
Well, for scenario 1, the $710,000 for last year, did we use the general fund to get that through? So that was on its own. So 23-24 is when SB 1383 will kick in, and plus with the dump closing, that's part of that increase in cost?
Yeah, it's a significant part of that increase.
Yes, so as William stated, yes, it's a significant part of that increase. And so with Teapot closing, now our transportation to the landfill is considerably further.
Yes. So that's a bigger cost than SB 1383?
No, it's a combination. So the rollout, the city has done its best to meet the minimum requirement of implementation because of finances. So we've been through the process of working through jurisdictional review with CalRecycle, and our level of participation has been enough to meet an expectation of showing an effort. But the reality is, we have not fully implemented. It was, put in process in January of '22, and to continue and not fully implement the program as needed will put the city in a jurisdictional compliance issue at some point in time.
And what are the consequences if we don't comply with an unfunded mandate?
William, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's $10,000 a day for non-compliance. It seems to be a common tune with
More money.
those.
Who's charging the $10,000 a day?
State of California.
It'd be state
It's the
California.
state of California?
Yes.
Will
It's
be a
not like a EPA or,
No, state of
No, it's CalRecycle, it's up to $10,000 a day.
did you say Cal Recycling?
Yes.
CalRecycle, they're the state's waste management authority.
Right.
But no elected officials in that authority?
No, it's a department.
It's
a
the department. It's a
yes.
state department.
It's like water boards or DWR.
Gonna just play around here with scenarios. I'm gonna make my own. What if we did a 56% increase, which would be $9.96, which would get us to the average of $27.81, and we did that 23-24 and implemented it right away? Would that get us at a rate to where we would be able to stay financially fit for 5 years and reevaluate?
If everything was listed the way this is, that's an additional 9% a little earlier. But, we've got 20% cumulative over the next, so I would say no. But with all of this, again, with 1383, we've projected, these are projections, actual expenses may vary. We would recommend that the division look at this annually. So it could be, but again, just in terms of, you're looking at then effectively 60% this year and nothing the next 4 years. So you've had 10% earlier, but you've given up 20% over the next 4 years. It's going to get you close, but not exact. But again, so much is going on. There's so many changes that the division is planning to implement with these additional resources that you're going to want to look at it on an annual basis. So I wouldn't say wait until the end of 5 years. Keep track of it going forward. If you did do that this year, obviously you don't have to do it next year and probably the year after. So it will allow you to not have near-term rate increases, but you'd have to see how things shake out in the next several years in terms of where that gets you at the end of 5 years and what, if any, additional adjustments might be needed.
Okay, did you have something, John? Oh, I thought. Oh, okay, yeah, so that's just something, a thought of mine. If we just went out the gate and did a 56% increase, got to an average rate of our neighbors, because if we go with scenario number 2, which I guess that was what I would favor next, we're going to be in the top tier of waste management in comparison to cities like Clovis. Now, if we do go with the service or scenario 2, per se, will any services increase? And that's a question at you, Mike.
So just to provide some clarification, if we go with scenario 2, the proposed rate, we would be at 30, at the end of the period, I believe, is where we would be close to where you're stating. The issue is, much like if, the findings, as Councilmember Beltran mentioned earlier, processes that was assumed to be in place that are being recommended, they are in place. And one of the great opportunities of going through this process is defining all the areas that we need to improve. So we have a level of these capacities in place, but the need to improve upon them and implement new ones is there as well. So just in route management alone, we have route cards. So it's almost paper processing and additions that change. So somebody is always updating that documentation to make sure the routes are being updated continuously. One of the implementations would be management metrics to provide consistent route management and provide real-time changes and record keeping of those interactions between the refuse driver and the customer. Those abilities to capture lost revenue. But those implementations are in the costs of hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that and a time for implementation. So as much as I would say services improving or additional services, and services would be improving, but we wouldn't be adding new services. Like, we would still continue to handle the existing refuse stream that we already handle, but it would be in a more efficient manner to communicate to the customer and for the operation of the driver, both in safety and cost recovery through implementation of these plans.
Here's just a question kind of off, but how often do we sweep streets in Porterville?
We sweep the whole city in a month.
So every street gets swept once a month?
Yes.
I think that's an Air Board requirement, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it's an Air Board requirement.
Okay.
And so currently, we struggle to keep up with that. And there are sections of streets that want more service. We've done additional efforts to keep Main Street in good condition. And so Main Street does get swept every Friday. Also, the street sweeping that occurs with every civic event that's up and down Main Street and throughout town. And that is why one of the recommendations is to increase street sweeping.
Yeah, so just comparison, I talked to some people out of Clovis, and so seeing the scenario 2, we're very similar in the cost. And so just talking with the services that they receive there in Clovis, like they get their street sweep twice a month. So that's not something we would see with raising these prices.
Well, with that being said, if it gets swept once a month now with one street sweeper, the implemented rate is adding another street sweeper. So
Okay.
essentially the frequency would increase, yes. I just would say and my response to that was you're already receiving street sweeping. We wouldn't be creating a new, process of street sweeping, but yes, the frequency would increase, so potentially 2 times a month.
Okay.
Ours also includes graffiti removal too.
Correct, yes.
Correct? Is that, how does that stack up to other jurisdictions?
I was so focused on everything else, I don't know that I looked at.
Well,
graffiti
I only
removal.
raised that
I'll be honest.
I mean, this was a very important issue back in 2006, and that's when that got incorporated within graffiti removal, which has been, which we contract with PSW for that. So, I mean, it's just another, when you talk about, there's already things we do that other jurisdictions don't from a community beautification or sweeping. Another example is graffiti, which I do, and the city managers were just having a conversation about this last week about street sweeping because they've been using a specific set of transportation funds that have been discontinued. It was kind of they're fretting a little bit on how they're going to pay for street sweeping. Just know there's an anomaly somewhere in how street sweeping is paid for that has some consternation of our neighbors where they're going to pay for it from. So I will tell you, Visalia is not paying for street sweeping out of their refuse rates, right? Well, they're not, and neither is Tulare.
Well, and something that I have to consider, and I think we should say it out loud, Clovis doesn't have to drive as far to dump a dump truck, right? And so that is a huge factor in this. And so something I've talked with John about before, but I think that Porterville should look at possibly opening up its own waste management or dump, if you call it, for ourselves, something more local, and it'd actually help some of the local, possibly we could have some kind of agreement with like Terabella to Lindsay, some of our local communities. Just a thought out loud. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
So in looking at first of all, I know this took a lot of effort to put all these scenarios and data and analysis together for us, and just want to thank you and the consultants for all this information. I think in looking at the scenarios, I'm leaning towards number 2 myself, and there's a couple of reasons. One is I would like to not have red across any of the years and get us out of that. Also seeing how scenario 3, which would be my next option, has it broken down, we'd increase 30% and then following, which is pretty significant, and then follow up with another 25. I don't feel like that's relief. I feel like it would be best just to make that increase, get us in green where we're on the path to where we need to be, and then have that slight 5% continued increase. That's why I feel comfortable with scenario 2, and just giving the public the information about what that actually includes, and I know that the city already does a lot, but I think just, resharing that, the vehicles, the cost of that, the operations, the maintenance, all the things that were discussed in our slides, really important to our city, and also being innovative with services, good services that we provide to city residents. And then with that comment, Mayor, I just had 2 other things really quick. On the schedule where it gives, the table where it gives all the different cities, and then it says curbside recycling, green waste, everyone's weekly except Tulare does bi-weekly. Does that save any money, or is it even?
So that was one,
Doable?
and William, I don't want to encroach on another slide. Were you going to talk about the frequency of service as well?
That's really, Michael, the same day versus the 3-day service you have. So that isn't specific to the weekly or bi-weekly. I will say, though, with SB 1383 and the collection of residential organics with the green waste has to be weekly now because that's putrescible material. So that isn't really an option. You know, bi-weekly, you know, there's some savings, but that's really going backwards in terms of reducing service is often a difficult from a you know, PR standpoint. It could have some savings, but that would be something to look at if you're interested in it when you do the rerouting, because it would require a rerouting of the city as well. So perhaps you could look at the impact of weekly and bi-weekly recycling when you reroute the system the next time you do that. That would be our suggestion.
Thank you. I was just curious because I did see that one anomaly on the list, so I just thought, you know, find out a little bit more about that. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank all council members for their questions, their input, and it's really good to hear each and every one participate, especially when it comes to rates and go along with it. Solid waste has always been a delicate situation because we have had it, we don't have it, and now we have to deal with it, especially when it's taken away from us. First of all, I want to say thank you because when we received the packets, once again, what we're looking for on the slide was sent to us in the packets, and it's very clear. I'm looking, when I first looked at it, and this is another one I wanted to say, educate me on this, but I'm okay with it. After listening to all the conversation and the dialogue, I was leaning towards scenario 3. 2 is good, I don't deny that. 1's out of the question, 4 was nah, but 2 and 3 were strong, but I was leaning more towards scenario 3 because I was looking at the cumulative rate at the end of the 5 years, but I'm also looking at, once again, the community that we live in and the sensitivity for everyone, especially some of those people who, some of our constituents that cannot afford an immediate increase. And we have businesses, and like I said, we want to help straight across everyone, all members of our community. So my comment after listening to all the conversation, all the questions that were asked, all the comments, I'm leaning towards scenario 3. So that's, what direction would you need from us? You have 2 scenario 2s and you have 3 scenario 3s.
So
We would
It's
present.
not a vote.
We would present both.
Okay.
And you would act at that time.
Okay.
And schedule
Well,
it.
here's our dilemma on this, though, because we need to do, what we have to do is a public hearing notice. The public hearing notice needs to include the highest amounts for each year of the schedule. So we'd have to present it in that way. But the problem is we don't want to go over the revenue. So I think what Mike would prefer is you guys can decide on a scenario so that we know what caps to use, because we can always, the council can go lower than that after the public hearing, but we will not be able to go higher on any given rate at the public hearing.
And
Public
just-
hearing is our, basically, because we don't want to deprive anybody of their due process rights over a particular rate.
So how do you differentiate between 2 and 3, where you have a 50% in 23 versus 30?
Because
and
it's a
then
schedule. We're actually needing approval of what schedule to kind of go with.
Oh, no,
So
when you said, so.
in the notice, it would provide, this would be the amount, this is the proposed amount for this year, the proposed amount for this year, the proposed amount for this
No,
year.
I understand.
So we'd have to use scenario 2 because it's 50%, that's the highest. Is that correct?
Well,
Or is
it's,
it cumulative on the 88% after 5?
Which percentage do
we
we go
can't go
by?
cumulatively because
Yeah.
it's every given year and
Have to give
increase.
a given year.
It has to be the schedule.
So just in this discussion too, I want to provide, and please correct me if I'm out of bounds here, William, but as we look at this, you're showing a rate increase projected for a fiscal year. We were not before you prior to July. So the 23-24 fiscal year is what we would anticipate is to apply that at the the first part of January if it's approved through council. And so although it says 50%, this is projected over a fiscal year application. So that 50% is really only 50% applicable across 6 months. So if you look at the other scenarios that reflect a negative result due to the fixed rate increase, it's really, if you look at the 50%, you're going to see something similar to the 30 or 25% based on the fact that 6 months has already passed us. So that's where the 50% scenario, you know, because 2 and 3 would have been really close. I mean, you're relatively close in the application, but due to the timing and the significance of already presenting a negative balance into this last year's operation, the significance is to move forward.
So you're proposing that we would so what you were actually saying is, if they were to agree on scenario 2, for instance, and give you authority for scenario 2, we would still be looking at a 50% increase, but it would only be in effect for 6 months.
Correct.
Just, so it would stay the same, but what would change is the years. It would be calendar years. Is that how you're going to do it?
Well, it would start in a.
Or you're going to do
start the
6 months for for a fiscal
the
year,
fiscal
and then
year
do
would
the next
catch.
fiscal year and the next fiscal year.
Correct.
So, okay, I got you.
Because of the timing.
Right.
Thank you for that clarification.
Well,
For what it's worth.
But,
the number's the number. It's still 50%.
Exactly, but thank you, yeah.
It goes from 1785 to
The-
either 2678, which is 50% increase, or it goes to 2321, which is 30. Doesn't matter. I mean, yeah, if you're concerned about the, you know, to what extent it's negative, but it's really.
6 months.
You know, if we're, it's really the core, what is the residential rate? And it can't, because that's really what, that's why I said, city attorney said this, it's not the percentage, it's the 2678 or the 2320. That's the actual
The residential
number
rate.
that is being deliberated.
Right. That's true. Yeah, I got you.
That's all I was saying.
I understand what you're saying. I thought you meant
yeah,
like
I
revenue
understand
amount.
what
I'm like,
Mike's saying
yeah.
from a revenue generation standpoint, but in the end, that's separate than the issue that Julia's speaking to, which is what is it 2678 or is it 2321? And then what are the succeeding years?
Right, when we do this, but yeah, for 218 limits us here. We have to, when we do the public noticing, we have to give the max rates on the schedule for the amount of the schedule, so each one will matter. So that's why we do need, I think we could theoretically do some sort of alternative, but it'll be very confusing to the customers to get a public hearing notice saying, it might be this, or it might be this. And I think that for the sake of them being able to understand what to expect, it's probably better to stick with one, if you guys can decide.
Oh, Councilmember Wyrock, 3, Councilmember Beltran, 3. I leaned on number 3. And you and the vice mayor were leaning toward 2.
If I may, if we were to come in with higher numbers
Yeah.
for the public hearing, and then we gave some back, there'd be no harm in that. But if we came in with low numbers, and then during the public hearing, they want them even lower, we may not be able to deliver the quality of services that they've come accustomed to, and with the improvements that we're trying to provide, might not be able to afford them. So, it's going to be a hard pill to swallow, especially on top of these other rate increases. I hope we're going to put them out over a period of time and not all in the same quarter. But, just a thought, a higher rate now and then be able to negotiate lower with our community input, I think might be a prudent way to consider going.
Any comment? I don't have any comment.
I think just my comment again is I just don't feel comfortable, I mean, whatever our decision is, we'll do, but I think we're making a significant increase either way, but with the number 3, we're still in the red, making that significant increase, and we're still giving them another increase the following year.
Well, the cumulative increase is overall more, right? If you look over, you can see, it's
Yeah.
going to be an
Increase would be
88%
overall.
increase versus an 82% increase.
And so is their overall rate. It's going to be 33.58 versus 32.55. So,
And the potential risk to implement corrective actions immediately after, within the first fiscal year of implementation. If it does continue to go red, then we would have to defer those implementations.
Does staff have a preference?
and we have the option to be out of the red.
Well, the recommendation would be to scenario two, but council has already provided a lot of input, and so I don't want to speak, contrary to that, but
It's just an opinion. We get that.
That's why I suggest,
Scenarios
because you can't vote tonight.
No.
Right.
No.
I want to be very clear, I don't want a Brown Act accusation. So,
No.
Mr. Wyrock's,
Yeah.
you can't,
No.
you can't vote. So that's why I recommended we can bring this back as options 2 and 3 at a properly.
Oh, and then notice it later.
Noticed meeting. You make decision, and that gives us direction on how we go. And
John, if-
we can do that, I don't want to say next Tuesday, but the following Tuesday.
If we're going to bring that back, could you bring my scenario back of 56% increase?
Let me see here.
Which is,
Trying to just calculate how
is
long.
the first year without any, for the succeeding
Yeah,
four, right?
just right out the
Yeah.
gate, get it done,
what I would
and we get to an average with our community.
Mike, when are you wanting to do the public hearing?
the schedule will be different with the.
No, but what, it would be for sure. If we, even if we brought it, what if we brought it back on the 5th? That's why I'm asking.
We can continue the deliberation until next Tuesday.
Okay. I'll do my best. We'll have to.
I was just gonna quickly run the numbers to see if we can make it still work. What's your target
Preferably, it would be
public
before
hearing date?
the second meeting in November, preferably,
is when you want the public hearing, right?
preferably, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the 15th. Okay.
So
I just want to comment.
you have
we're
to give the
okay.
notice by,
I would have to go to council, the next scheduled meeting to request the public hearing. To provide enough time to get everything out, I believe.
which is at least not less than 45 days.
You have to have the public hearing notice basically on the 24th. Or you have to have everybody has to have, I'm sorry, not public hearing notice. You have to have the notices out to the residential rate payers by the 24th of September, which is cutting it close, right? When do all your,
I could do a one-time mailer and put it
Okay.
all together. I just have to have it.
so
ready.
that means the 22nd.
I would have to have it
Friday
all
the
ready to go.
22nd.
So it would have to be all packaged up, ready to go, so that after the council meeting, if it was to move forward, which would generally be prepared after the study session, so once it goes to council and it's approved, then we would go through with the mailer and we would meet the adequate
Well,
time.
It gives you 2 weeks. It's a tight, I get it, it's a tight timeframe.
Does that allow for the sufficient time for finance to get the notification in? Or are you doing separate mailer?
I would do a separate.
Separate mailer?
Separate mailers.
You're already planning to do
I
separate?
was planning to, because
Okay.
we have 3 documents.
Okay. My recommendation, just given
Okay.
the direction we have right now, is it's abundantly clear next Tuesday.
And just because we don't want to do a polling situation either,
No.
and that's what we're talking about. So I think it's better
No.
for you to, if we're in like a divided council situation, which it sounds like we are right now, which is totally fair, it's a lot of information, we can have it, continue it, and actually have you able to act and give a clear authorization to the Public Works at the next meeting.
Question I have, not on that, okay, to go back and just to summarize and direct, since we were okay with recycled water to mirror the existing, that's all, and we're agreeable to the sewer rates with the alternative 3, that's already the direction. Okay, so what will be, okay, it will be this, and I appreciate that clarification. Any other comments? Okay.
Well, so will this be a scheduled matter, and then
Yeah.
we'll have those 3 new scenarios, or,
Yeah, so there'll be the
2, 3, and-
2 and 3, and then running an additional one
okay.
with 56%.
And that's just an additional one-time of 56%?
Right.
With no programmed
Right.
increases afterwards?
Right.
Okay.
And showing what that, if, the gentleman's name again?
William?
William.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
No, we were just making sure you're still there, William.
Well, I think he has still more to present, right?
Yeah, William, I mean,
Same-day
I
service.
apologize for interrupting you, but you had additional slides to review in regards to the privatization or following?
Yeah, if you go to the next slide where, so this is multiple day collection service versus the same day residential service. So the city currently provides weekly collection of trash, recyclables, and green waste Monday through Friday, which is typical in most jurisdictions, weekly service for the three commodities, although some do bi-weekly. So that's, that in itself is not uncommon. However, the way the services are provided, the city's divided into 4 zones with collection services for each of those 3 commodities scheduled for different days within each collection zone. So under the system that the city has, you have routes distributed throughout the city on any given day. So there's 4 zones, there's routes in each zone. Cans are set out on 3 different days each week in each collection zone. And you have garbage trucks traveling down each residential street 3 days per week, 1 truck each of the 3 days that the different services are scheduled. If we go to the next slide, this is just showing what I just laid out in words in terms of the cities. Those are the 4 collection zones, and you can see in zone 1, recycling is on Monday, green waste, yard waste is on Tuesday, and garbage is on Thursday. Similar 3-day schedule for each of the other 4 zones. So that's the way the city is now. That's an uncommon collection system. If you go to the next slide, really the industry standard is to provide all residential collection services on the same day with routes sweeping across the city over the course of the week. Same-day service is, like I said, the most common structure, and it has a number of benefits. It allows for more efficient route supervision. So instead of the supervisors having to be all over the city every day, because you have routes spread out throughout the city every day, they're in one area each day, and they sweep together across the city. So it makes for more efficient supervision. It also more efficient for the routes to provide support for an open route. So if there's a route that doesn't have a staff person, which is happening at this sometimes because of the limited staffing, all the routes are in the same area. It's more efficient to cover that open route. And some residents find that placing carts out for service on the same day is preferable to having them out on 3 different days. So that's really the most common system in the industry. Again, same-day service, though, requires that all 3 carts be placed at the curb on the same day, which can present challenges on certain streets like tight cul-de-sacs. Because you've got 3 carts out, there's much more crowding. So that's really the challenge with 3-cart service. A complete system reroute would be required to provide same-day service and would require electronic account mapping capacity, preferably dedicated staff resources and public education and outreach during the transition to let the people know of the change. So we're not suggesting that the city switch to same-day residential service at this point, although I know the division has been looking at that, or perhaps shifting to 2 days rather than 3 days to address the fact that some of the streets are very tight and having 3 carts out may be an issue. But it is something to consider, and again, something that we understand the division is looking at. Next slide.
William, if I can, this has been brought up before. As you said, it's a common, this is another example where there's a common standard and we're something different. And so I would call this a convenience factor because people forget which day and what color can. So instead of just saying, this is my day and all my cans go out. So this has always been a driver and truck issue. Do we know how many more trucks and drivers were needed to be able, because we dual use vehicles, which is why we segment it. So did we look at how many more trucks and drivers we needed to be able to switch to that?
Some of it would be dependent of route evaluation. So some of the criteria to go through and GIS map the route infrastructure needs to be done to evaluate whether it's a 2-day or 1 day. we think we can do it. It's just a matter of the size of the routes and how they're structured. One of the other performance, and I don't know if it's listed in one of William's slides, but evaluating the days of service with currently the department works 410s, making an evaluation of on-time route efficiency, whether it would be more beneficial to do a 5 8-hour day service. So a combination of those changes would play into the implementation of that.
Okay.
And same-day service, you still have the same workload, so all factors the same, you know, you'd have the same routes, same number of routes, you just have them routed differently in different areas of the city. This chart simply shows, again, throughout the region, what other jurisdictions are doing, and you can see that same-day service, again, is the most common, with 2-day service. In some jurisdictions, the 3-day service is really an anomaly in Porterville, although Bakersfield does have part of it routed for 3-day. They've got a very varied system. So again, same-day services, both in the region and throughout the state is the standard. Next slide. So outsourcing collection services. Again, this would involve, instead of the city collecting it with the municipal staff and equipment, you would put out a bid to the private sector, an RFP, and engage one of the private haulers to provide collection services. You know, of the more than 500 incorporated cities and counties in California, the vast majority do privatize or have the private sector providing collection services. There are about 50, actually less than 50 municipal operated systems in California at this point, with many of those in the Central Valley. You know, perhaps the greatest advantage of municipal service is that you have direct control over solid waste management system. You don't have to call up Waste Management and ask them, or whoever the hauler is, to do something. You can go out and do it yourself. So you have direct control. With that total control also comes total responsibility for the safety, operational, financial, and regulatory compliance aspects of those services. Were you to privatize, you would likely structure the contract to place most, if not all, of those requirements on the private operator. But now you have a private operator that you have to manage. So there's additional requirements that you need to take on, although you can shift much of the responsibility for everything else to your service provider. You know, one of the major limitations of municipal operations is the lack of economies of scale, because, you know, you have your one operation and you need to have, you know, safety systems and policies and procedures for your one system versus private operators that operate across multiple jurisdictions. They're able to have significant economies of scale in terms of staffing and programs and services and resources. So that's a big limitation of municipal operations. Additionally, the lack of supporting resources from the corporate office. You know, again, safety. I'll use safety as an example because it's critical to effective collection operations, which are one of the most dangerous jobs there is. Actually, more dangerous than police and fire in terms of deaths and injuries. You know, the Waste Management, you know, has an incredible safety program that they've implemented throughout their operations. There's huge economies of scale. The corporate office is able to develop, you know, resources for SB 1383 that they can spread across multiple jurisdictions. So that's really a big limitation of municipal operations, lack of economies of scale versus privatizing operations. There's significant economies of scale. But again, the division is doing a good job, better than a good job with available resources. The issue is not that they're not performing. The issue is they don't have the resources that they need at this point to meet the industry standards and compliance. So from the standpoint of privatization, there's no need to privatize because operations are poor. That isn't the issue, and that often is the issue for other jurisdictions. Not only that operations are a mess, but also that rates are high. And again, in your situation, your rates are very, you know, too low. And even with that 50% rate increase, you're going to be less than the average of the region. So, one of the things that's looked at with privatization as well is the opportunity to get additional funds from the private sector. And there have been cases where a city has been able to privatize. They've been able to get additional funding from the hauler with little if no rate increase. But those cases are where the rates are sky high to begin with, or much higher than where you are. So that isn't the case in Porterville. So the opportunity for, reaping a windfall through privatization in terms of additional funds and not impacting the rates really doesn't exist here in Porterville because your rates are so low. And even with the increase to get you to where you need to be, they're still, well below the average in the region. So there isn't that significant higher rate that you can privatize with, and somebody can come in, realize economies of scale and operational efficiencies, and still have significant revenue in that rate base that they can give back to the city. So that's often, again, one of the things that cities look towards to get for privatization. Again, we don't see that as a situation in Porterville. That's not an option because of where your rates are. If you wanted to get something back, from additional revenues from privatization, you'd have to increase the rates. So we just wanted to present privatization because it is often an issue that comes up with municipal operations. Again, our recommendation, and in looking at the division's operations, you have good staff. They're doing a very effective job. They just need the finances and resources to do it the way they'd like to do it. I think that's it. So I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Any other comments, any other questions? None? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
William, I'll just add that I'm really glad you made that statement about fire and police when the chiefs were not in the room.
I'm feeling a public safety 2 at 55, was it 3
I don't hear
3
a
at
comment.
55 formula coming on? Public safety formula.
Once again, I want to thank each of the council members for their input and staff for giving us the information and such an articulate report that we received in the studies. It was all there. With that being said, it is 7:43. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, William.
Thank you.